Blog Talk Radio.
Namaste, folks. Welcome to Nature of Reality Radio on June 1st, 2016. This is your host, Andrew Fisher, broadcasting Wednesdays from the suburbs of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, to expose the true and false nature of reality for what it is and what it is not. On the show today, Jennifer W. Stein, a self-taught filmmaker who never went to film school. Well, good job there, Jennifer. A lot of things they teach you in film school is probably the way the powers that be want you to make films, so being a self-taught filmmaker is probably the way to go, and being self-taught is a good way to do a lot of things. Just ask John Hutchinson of the Hutchinson Effect thing. He never went to school, as he announced in that Conspiracy Theory with Jesse Ventura episode, and yet he became a genius when it comes to working with electricity. But anyway, I'm digressing. Jennifer W. Stein, like I said, a self-taught filmmaker who never went to film school, an entrepreneur, started making films in the 90s while running nonprofit organizations, raising two kids, and running special events businesses. Her best-known documentary, Travis, the True Story of Travis Walton. Very interesting how the name Travis Walton seems to be coming up so often in my life recently. I mean, I heard about it on and off during my awakening from like 2009 onward. Early on, maybe I heard the name a few times, like watching all those UFO TV Studios YouTube channel films, but recently, it's become a lot more prominent. Before the MUFON conference in Langhorne, Pennsylvania, this past fall, the first thing they did at the conference was show the documentary. I'm not exactly sure if this was the documentary in question. Maybe Jennifer can clarify whether this Travis Walton documentary is the one that was shown at the MUFON conference. And I believe this is Jennifer in the queue here, area code 610. It's not too far from where I'm from, by the way. I'm area code 215267. So, Jen, you are there. I'll get you on at 10 after the hour at the latest, which is 8 minutes from now. I'll try to get you on earlier. But Travis Walton, I'll let her give her the floor. First thing we're going to talk about is that story and the documentary and Travis Walton's legacy and all the rest of it. But I first heard about it during my awakening many years ago. Then before the MUFON conference, John Ventry brought it to my attention, saying that before these speakers there's going to be a showing Travis Walton film. And then it seems like ever since then, like on once every 3 programs I watch on YouTube, the name Travis Walton is mentioned. It's almost like my spirit guides and guardian angels are trying to tell me this is a character who everybody in the world needs to know about, so we're going to rub it in your face, and so you wake up to the fact that the rest of the world needs to have it rubbed in their face. Well, I'm not exactly sure if that's what my angels and guides are trying to tell me by directing me on a path that's causing me to see Travis Walton's name come up in a lot of instances, and not just UFO instances, but we'll get into that in a little bit and some other things. I'd like to have a debate with Jennifer on a couple of things, because a couple of things she stands for. I'm really not so sure what her stance is. I have to plead ignorance on that. But things like gun control legislation and environmental awareness, there's been a lot of disinfo in regards to that, and I'm not exactly sure what Jennifer's stance is on that, but that's going to be after Travis Walton. If I disagree with her, I guess we'll have a little fun here, have a little debate, and we're not going to be all buddy-buddy about it. We'll do a general dialogue. We have a lot of respect for each other. That's the way we do things on Nature of Reality Radio. Whenever you're debating, yours truly, the host, I will treat you nicely, treat you fairly, and if we agree to disagree, so be it, but we'll never get in our face about it. Anyway, I've babbled and digressed long enough. First, before I get Jennifer on, the news, courtesy of Alex Jones and Company at InfoWars. First article, citizens call for censorship, put feelings ahead of rights. The First Amendment is going extinct. Former RT, used to stand for Russia Today, now it's just RT. Before I read any further, RT, that, for me, I used to watch that a lot, but I stopped watching it after the Sandy Hook massacre, and they were talking about gun control and all that and saying we got to ban guns. Well, all right, it's funny I'm mentioning this because I'm going to be talking about this with Jennifer, I'm sure, but I know what the gun ban is all about and all that, and Russia Today was going along with that, so I kind of stopped watching them after that. But Russia Today, they do have their own political agenda because they are controlled and funded to a great extent by Vladimir Putin and those in the Russian government, although many people say that in the present day, Vladimir Putin, the Illuminati bloodlines don't have as much control over him anymore as they used to, and he is leaking information like a sieve, as David Wilcock once said Putin is. And well, David Wilcock even went as far as actually suggesting that Vladimir Putin may be meeting with benevolent extraterrestrials to decide future plans. Now, I think maybe David's going a little bit off the deep end there. I'm not going to go willing to go that far, but Vladimir Putin, I think it's fair to say he's acting like a benevolent dictator to a great degree now, as the Illuminati is losing control over him. But anyway, I digressed from this article. The former RT correspondent Margaret Howell joins Leanne McAdoo in studio to break down the assault on the Western way of life. Okay, this is just a general video. I was actually watching a few snippets of this before the show, and they were talking about one of the things she mentioned was that how Eric Holder seems to be praising Edward Snowden. Former Attorney General Eric Holder has recently said some nice things about Edward Snowden. Could it be that the demons are being exorcised out of Eric Holder and he's acting like a good guy now for a change, and maybe he'll leave the dark side and join the good side now and fight for freedom? Well, then some might say that's wishful thinking, but Eric Holder, he did say he hated Edward Snowden before and make that clear, and now all of a sudden he said a few nice things about him. Well, maybe the demons are being exorcised out of Eric Holder, and if they are, let's hope they get exorcised out of the rest of the corrupt tyrants. Next article, Pentagon, special ops killing of pregnant Afghan woman was, quote, appropriate, unquote, use of force. 2 children shot during raid and multiple witnesses. Afghan investigators allege U.S. soldiers dug bullets out of body of dead pregnant woman. An internal Defense Department investigation into one of the most notorious night raids conducted by Special Operations Forces in Afghanistan, in which 7 civilians were killed, including 2 pregnant women, determined all the U.S. soldiers involved had followed the rules of engagement. As a result, the soldiers faced no disciplinary measures, according to hundreds of pages of Defense Department documents obtained by The Intercept through FAOIA in the aftermath of the raid. Administrator William McRaven, at the time the commander of the Elite Joint Special Operations Command, took responsibility for the operation. The documents made no unredacted mention of JSOC, Joint Special Operations Command. Well, no shock that the U.S. soldiers are not facing punishment. You got to feel really bad for those soldiers. We just recently had Memorial Day, and a lot of people don't know what that's about, sadly, as InfoWars Reporter discovered, but it's about honoring our soldiers, and those soldiers don't realize all the wars are illusions. The powers that be control both sides of the wars, and funding control both sides, and they're just pawns in that plot, and they're given medication and inoculated with vaccines against their will. Those soldiers are. It's very tragic. Don't join the military, folks. Even if you need money, don't join. It's not in your best interest. Next article, General Mills recalls 10 million pounds of flour over E. coli outbreak. Flour recalled including gold medal, Wondra, and more. General Mills has recalled an estimated 10 million pounds of flour over fears they contain the E. coli virus. Over 38 people have been stricken with the virus in 20 days, and General Mills has linked it to their flour. Well, good for you, General Mills. It looks like you're trying to protect us to some degree, and you're taking action, saying, well, maybe we are the suspects, so we're gonna play it safe. So I guess that's a good thing. I mean, at Whole Foods, they actually sell General Mills Honey Nut Cheerios cereal. I've noticed that's like the only General Mills cereal other than 365 brand or Nature's Path brand that Whole Foods gives, and Honey Nut Cheerios no longer contains GMO. General Mills decided to remove that. So General Mills, if you guys are having the demons exercised out of you like Eric Holder, well, that's good. And if you are, well, maybe this is a sign of it. You're recalling your food out of concern for everybody. Good move. Next article, leftist heroine Elizabeth Warren ready to back Hillary Clinton. Ignores fact Clinton's services, the great vampire squid Goldman Sachs. Get ready, progressives. Your hero is about to climb into bed with the bankers. I will admit there have been petitions that I've signed that Elizabeth Warren has backed that do stand for good things. But in the end, Elizabeth Warren is a leftist, and a lot of other brainwashed leftists, they seem to think it's okay for the majority to overpower the minority to some degree, and maybe that's why she's ready to back Hillary Clinton and would probably even back Bernie Sanders too, because he's a socialist. And well, Elizabeth Warren, wake up, realize that we're supposed to be a republic and not a democracy. I love some of the things you stand for, but when you do these things, it makes me want to do a double face palm. Our next article, UCLA shooting, another gun-free zone. Victim disarmament policy claims more lives. At least 2 people were killed during a shooting at UCLA campus today, and yet another victim disarmament gun-free zone. You know, a lot of people, if people had guns on them, they could have stopped this attack because criminals do not commit crimes in places where everybody owns guns. And I've often said if every student, every teacher in a school had a gun, it would be the safest school in the world because nobody's going to commit a crime in that school because they know the guns could be used to stop them. So the 2 reported dead near the School of Engineering building, at a possible murder-suicide. So I'm not going to go say there's a false flag just yet. It does raise some suspicions and all that, but all right, enough of the news. One more thing I want to point out before getting Jennifer Stein on. There was an article on in5d.com in not too distant past saying that the end of the Mayan calendar is actually 3.5 years behind schedule. And some have said that the end of the Mayan calendar is actually in 2 days from now, June 3rd, 2016. I don't really care to debate that. Other people like Jay Parker, who had on my show, said the calendar is about 3 years off, but look, I'm not going to speculate. I don't know. I know some significant things happened on 12/21/2012, but it's something you guys can make up for yourself. I really don't think anything truly significant is going to happen in 2 days, but there is a new moon the day after that. So, all right, whatever. I've babbled long enough. Let's get Jennifer Stein on. Jennifer Stein, you are on the air. How you doing?
Thanks. I'm wonderful. Thanks for having me on the air.
I'm glad to have you on, and I should know this, but I don't. Was that your documentary that I watched at the MUFON conference at the Langhorne Hotel before the presentations, or is that a completely different documentary?
No, that is exactly the documentary. I've been a member of MUFON PA for about 12 to 15 years now, and I work closely with our state director, John Ventry, and he asked me if I'd be willing to, provide the film for last year's conference, and I did. So I did Q&A after the film, and you did get to see it. You're very lucky. It's not available in a lot of places.
I missed the first 5 minutes. Actually, was a little late behind schedule, but I did catch most of it, and I do really enjoy it. I did really enjoy watching it. And like I said, for whatever the reason, the name Travis Walton, the guy, it seems like every so often in my life for the past several months, he's popping up, even in unrelated UFO things that have nothing to do with UFOs. Like Mark Passio, for example, he in a presentation I saw on YouTube recently, he wasn't talking about aliens or UFOs or Travis Walton's case. He just showed a quote that Travis Walton made, and Travis Walton basically said something to the effect of, "I can't help but notice that one of the biggest flaws in humanity is that people will refuse to believe the truth if they can't handle the truth," or something to that effect. But that's a whole other issue in of itself, why I'm seeing Travis Walton so much. And I do think, well, it's a significant case without question. So first and foremost, I am going to give you the floor here. Well, first of all, you are free to more than welcome to tell your life story in regards to how you become a self-taught filmmaker. You got the floor on that. And then after you finish that, you once again will have the floor to tell us anything and everything, the who, what, when, where, why, and how of the Travis Walton story. Go ahead.
Wow, that's a big handful. I will say that you did accurately sort of introduce how I got into doing filmmaking. I bought a video camera like a lot of people do, especially when they got smaller and smaller. And throughout the 80s and 90s, I was involved in school projects with my kids. I had an event coordination business. I started filming events that I did, mostly because it helped sell the next job when I needed to do that. And then I started to do my own little commercials for my event coordination business. And I also worked with other nonprofit organizations, some Jewish women's rights organizations. I ended up making a documentary about a friend of mine who was killed in a terrorist bus attack in Israel. We used the proceeds that fund raised to build a legal aid bureau in Carmiel, Israel, which was an immigrant town, and this Jewish women's organization happened to work with Druze women as well as Palestinian women who came out of surrounding Syria or Lebanon or Jordan, or even the United Arab Emirates who were looking for political asylum or needed help, or women who were caught in domestic abuse situations and they needed a place to put their kids. So this film built a legal aid bureau that helped all types of women, and I really felt it was the best thing to do to honor my friend who was killed. She wasn't a particularly retaliatory type person. She didn't want to have any further aggression in her name perpetrated. That wasn't her style. And so we built this legal aid bureau to help women because when you live in a society where I think women are given equal rights and equal opportunity, they kind of balance out the society. They're smart undercurrent in society, and they tend to do a lot of really good things besides just raising kids and cooking good meals and thinking philanthropically. There's a lot of other good that comes from it. So when you see a society that suppresses its women, it's usually a society that is suppressing other human rights as well. So that was one of my first documentary films, and it did a lot of good, and I decided that I wanted my life to have more impact. And when I couldn't get excited about the next bar or bat mitzvah that I was planning, or the next wedding or something that someone had come to me to set up, I knew it was time to move on. And that's when I started doing more specific documentary work. And I'm self-taught. I probably would have liked to have gone to film school. I don't have anything against people that do. In fact, I hired people to help me on the film project that did go to film school. So I don't have anything poor to say about education. It's usually a good step. But I kind of got in through the back door. And I got involved in MUFON about 15, 18 years ago because I had some of my own sightings. I had more than one throughout my lifetime. But a major one that I had when I was about 19 was pretty close up, and it was a pretty unusual sighting. It stayed in my gray box for about for about 25 years. I didn't know what to do with it. I never heard anybody who had the same experience I had or saw the same thing I saw. So I wasn't outspoken about it. I didn't know about MUFON or anything like that. I basically encountered a large rectangle of white light that was about 70 feet long and about maybe 6 feet high, and it was within, I would say, 500 feet range of me. It was pretty huge. I mean, that could be as big as a house. I mean, houses are about 70 feet long. Some, split-level ranches can be about that long. So this was pretty significant. And again, it was weird. It was undulating white light, and it was clearly a rectangle. And it sort of appeared almost out of nowhere, and then it disappeared pretty quickly as well. I thought I was alone. 25 years later, I found out that someone else at the other floor of my house who was visiting at the time saw the exact same thing I did, and we never talked about it. So when I had that realization, I began to try to put the other sightings I had together in my life, and I said, okay, it's time for me to give myself permission to go and explore and read and study and understand. And part of that involved starting a local MUFON group in the Philadelphia area because there was not an active group. An author by the name of Tom Carey, who's written extensively on Roswell, basically said, Jen, I've got a mailing list, MUFON needs you, and I'm going to officially, knight you. You're now the MUFON representative. And I was like, well, wait, I don't know if I should do that. But I accepted the challenge, and I've been doing free public programming at a local library in the Radnor area. I figured it's good to work in your back door. So that's what I started. I started an organization called Mainline MUFON. I also hold another umbrella within Mainline MUFON, and that is for Noetic Sciences. I was a longtime friend of Edgar Mitchell. Met him when I was also about 19. He influenced me quite a bit. I joined his organization called Noetic Sciences, which is an organization which has been thinking outside the box for a long time, and some of the best researchers in the fields of concepts like entanglement and non-locality, and they're the forefront of our understanding of science and space and certain types of technology. Noetic Sciences has been very active in doing. They've been semi-partnered with Stanford University over certain periods of their history, and they're in Northern California. So I hold the umbrella also for Noetic Sciences, and I provide public programming through the local library system on all sorts of interesting topics. Anyone looking to learn more about mainline MUFON can go to just that website. Literally, it's 3 words, main and the word line and the word MUFON, M-U-F-O-N. And MUFON, for most people who probably are listening to your station should know, MUFON stands for the Mutual UFO Network. And it's a great organization, a civilian-based organization with people bringing science where they can to research sightings and landings and all sorts of reports that people make all across the country. And it's made up of volunteers. It was mostly formed originally by a lot of ex-military men who had incredible encounters and sightings with craft and sometimes with beings. And most of these people had very high-level clearances, guarding, storing, or moving nuclear weaponry. And they were sworn to secrecy over their experiences, and they found companionship with other like-minded people like themselves who felt that this knowledge was important for humanity's future, and they needed to come together and start a civilian-based organization which was going to accept reports and research them and begin to build a database for those disbelieving people who have not been lucky or unlucky enough to have a major encounter themselves. It's certainly not something I wish on everyone. Not everybody can handle this knowledge because it's a complicated knowledge and we have limited amount of information, and it really threatens some people's belief systems. So you have to understand where the firm ground is under you if you're going to get involved in an organization like MUFON. But they provide a great support network system, and I'm glad to see they're now starting to deal with the abduction experience. For a long time, MUFON didn't know how to deal with abductions, and they didn't attract and organize qualified hypnotherapists to really provide a support system for people who've had these terrifying experiences. It's one part of the phenomenon. We know it goes on and it exists. And so now MUFON has started an organization called FREE, which I believe stands for the Foundation for Research of Extraterrestrial Experiences. And Edgar Mitchell was actually one of those founders. So I'm happy to say MUFON's moving in that direction. But people who live in the Philly area who want to be involved in that, they can, come to mainline MUFON. So, long story short, after hosting a lot of UFO conferences, obviously my event coordination business and experience lent itself well towards organizing Philly MUFON conferences. I started to get asked to consult with other conferences. And the way I encountered Travis is I was assisting a man by the name of Peter Robbins, who wrote a book called Left at East Gate with Larry Warren as his co-author. That's a book about a very famous UFO encounter in the Rendlesham Forest in England. And similarly to what I was just describing, it involved nuclear weapons and military bases, and many, many, many personnel were involved in that particular incident in 1980. So I was helping Peter Robbins run the Roswell Conference in Roswell, New Mexico, a very famous UFO conference that goes on every year around the famous Roswell incident. It usually happens over 4th of July weekend, and I was there as an assistant. We had also brought in Jesse Marcel Jr. for that special award we gave him at that particular conference. And Travis was there speaking. So Travis Walton, myself, Peter, and a couple of other people went out to dinner in Roswell, and we started to talk to Travis about him having his own conference in honor of the 40th anniversary of their event, which was coming up in November of 2015. So you mentioned in your introduction that you're hearing about Travis Walton all the time, every time you turn around. It's probably because of that little planning committee that started over a bottle of wine in a restaurant in Roswell in the year 2010. That was about 5 years before the 40th anniversary. And Peter Robbins and I suggested to Travis that he consider having a conference somewhere in Arizona, either Phoenix or Payson or possibly Heber or Snowflake or Holbrook, one of the 3 small towns in northern Arizona where their event was centered, or possibly, somewhere at some resort center in the Sitgraves National Forest or at a casino up there. So we started the coordination of planning that event, and I offered to coach and show up and, be a bit of a support person, but I had the idea in the back of my mind to maybe make a film. I didn't know if I was capable of it. It was a bigger film than I had bit off before, but it was in the back of my mind. One of the things Travis wanted to do is take people to the forest on the anniversary of his event, and he wanted to do it in the evening. And I'm thinking to myself as an event coordinator, warning, red flag, not a good idea. It's dark. It's a half-a-mile walk. There are boulders, trees down, wild animals. How are you going to take 50, 60, 70, 100 people up into the forest? And what do you do if it's raining or it's going to snow or you can't drive vehicles in there? You have to walk from the edge of a dirt road. And what if people, have to go to the bathroom or they get too cold and they want to walk back to their car and they get lost, and then you've got people lost in the forest. I mean, as a logistics planner and somebody who usually has insurance for events, I just thought, this is never going to work. This is my thought privately. So I started to say, well, we should have a plan B, Travis. What about me coming out there and shooting an interview in the forest with some of the other guys who were there at the time, the other logging member crews? Let's do a walkthrough, and let's have a plan B as a film of a walkthrough of the forest. And he seemed to think that was probably a good idea because in November at this elevation in northern Arizona, you could have snow, heavy rains, the roads could be impassable, and you could plan to take people there, and then it just wouldn't be feasible. And if you've already bought and sold, tickets to take people there, it'd be good to have, maybe a good plan B. So I convinced him of that, and in 2013, I and another filmmaker here from Philadelphia named Bob Terrio flew out, and we started this first project, which was basically a description of what happened that day. It's a lovely short, well, I shouldn't say it's short, it's about an hour-and-a-half documentary, and it's called Tracking Sky Fire. And that was the first film we did. And Bob Terrio took the lead on that project and edited and put that together for Travis as a plan in the event that he couldn't take people to the site, and also as a product that Travis would have to sell in addition to his book. After we finished that film edit in 2013, I realized that I was planning, with John Ventry, the 2014 International MUFON Symposium, which we hosted in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And we were bringing in a number of speakers, and I was in a position to recommend some speakers as well. So I was able to help coordinate bringing in key speakers that I was interested in having in the film for Travis, like Lee Spiegel, Kathy Martin, Stan Friedman. We were hoping would be there. He actually didn't make it because he had a heart attack, but I was able to get him later. We also had Ben Hansen at that conference, and Ben had taken a long interest in Travis's case. He's well known for a television show called Fact or Faked, I think. I think it was a sci-fi program. And he's a former FBI person. He's got good investigation skills. And he came up to the site and did a very elaborate investigation and survey of the site with me while I was there filming and a couple of other people. In 2014, we did that in August. So I had a number of great interviews, and I had additional filming, which I went out in 2014 to capture. That was with Cy Gilson, who was the original man who did the polygraph tests on all the original crew members that Travis was in the forest with. And I also interviewed Marlon Gillespie, who was the chief sheriff at the time, handling the investigation. And then I knew I had a couple of other family members I was able to capture. I did some filming in the town of Snowflake, where Travis lives. And at that point, I knew I had a better potential, longer documentary that I could produce. So I sat Travis down. I did a 2-3 hour interview with him. I did a very in-depth interview with Richard Dolan. And then I really knew that I had the documentary under my belt. And then it was just a matter of really editing my pants off for 6 months and hiring some people to help me, which I did. And that's how I came up with the documentary in time for the 2015 Open Minds, where we screened it for the first time. For anyone who doesn't know, Open Minds, the International UFO Congress, is one of the largest UFO conferences that happens in the country. It's in Phoenix, Arizona, at a Indian resort called Wekopa. And usually it gets about 1,000 people. It's a 5-day conference, and it's the only UFO conference I know that also runs a film festival that coincides with the lectures and speaking series. And it's a great event, and I was really thrilled to sweep their awards. I won both categories that they provide. One is called the Best Documentary, and the other is called the People's Choice Award, which is of all the people at the conference who go to the films and see them, they get to vote on their favorite best film, and it won that award too. So it's really a great honor. Rarely do films win both, and I was very happy to win both awards with Travis at the 2015 conference. So Travis and I have continued to do speaking engagements around the country and screen the film. He's been doing them all of his life since he's written his book, but I've gotten to accompany him where the film was shown to a number of conferences. And I have to say, people come up to me from the audience and say, I was a real skeptic, or I've never been open-minded to this, and your film really helped open the door for me. And I think that's because it's not really a UFO film. People, say, that it's more of a personal story. It climbs inside Travis's experience and brings the viewer to understand what it was like for him, what his experiences were like, which is why it's named Travis, the true story of Travis Walton. So it's really like a human interest story. And it really goes into depth about how a UFO event can really destroy your life. So it's not something I recommend to a lot of people, neither would Travis, having had to live with this the rest of his life. And for Travis, his story is even more poignant because many people say have a sighting, like myself. And I kept it in my gray box. I didn't talk about it with anybody. I wasn't ready to handle the ridicule. I didn't understand what I saw. I didn't know anything about UFO groups. But in Travis's case, he was missing. He went missing for 5 days. By the time he was returned, he was an international story, and everyone was looking for him. And there was many assumptions made about Travis, that he had made it up or that the work crew people had made up this crazy story. So he was getting attacked and ridiculed. He didn't even have a choice if he was going to come forward or not come forward. He was already famous, and he had to come forward. So I really try to bring that out in the film so that people can climb inside and get a perspective from the inside out. So I think that's a good stopping point for me to give you and maybe listening members, if they email in questions or call in with questions. I think it's a good place for me to let you decide how you want to carve out the rest of this dialogue about the film. I'm happy to answer any other questions you have and go from there.
Well, right now I just wanted to get a general insight for those that are ignorant of this whole. I mean, this is preaching to the choir for a lot of UFO and ET researchers, but for those that aren't familiar, we got to do this. Could you please tell us the who, what, when, where, why, and how of the Travis Walton case?
Sure, of course. Yeah, that's like a no-brainer. So for anybody who doesn't know the Travis Walton story, this is basically the gist of it. He and 7 other men, all between the ages of 17 and 28, were working as a logging crew. And what they were doing is a process called timber stand improvement. And this is a process where they cut down underbrush, sometimes even gather dead and dried wood, cut down trees that have already been died or hit by lightning, and underbrush trees that don't really have a chance to grow, or if they grow, they'll hinder the health of trees around them. And they stack these into what they call slash piles, which are like 4 by 6 piles stacked that can be easily burned with, paper or something put in between them or light kindling. And they're usually burned in the winter months when you wouldn't set the forest on fire. And the forest they happen to be working in is called the Sitgraves National Forest. This happens to be the largest ponderosa pine forest in the world, and it stretches from the western side of New Mexico through northern Arizona, kind of curving up into parts of Utah and also parts of Colorado. And it's on a huge high ridge or plateau that's about 7,000 to 8,000 feet high, and it's beautiful. You can see it's a major geologic, unique configuration in the land, and you can often see it from an airplane, and I have, and you can, from the ground, you can see 50, 60, 70, or maybe even 100 and 120 miles, depending on where you are on this plateau ridge, looking out. So it's beautiful, and there are lots of wild horses up there, a bear, all sorts of things. So this was a normal work day. Part of the crew was new. Part of the crew had worked for almost 10 years together. Travis and the crew boss named Mike Rogers were best friends, and they'd worked together for almost 10 years. They were all leaving in one truck. It was a double-cabbed truck, so 3 guys were in the front, and in the second seat behind them were 4 guys. And in the rear of the cab, which was open, were all their chainsaws and gas cans and things like that. They would usually go up, bring their lunch. They'd go up at the crack of dawn, and they'd work till dusk, and that was their day. So they're leaving the forest, and they're not on a road. They have to kind of ride on what's called a logging road, which is literally just a cleared path through the forest so that there aren't huge boulders that would destroy the bottom of the truck. So they're driving on one of these logging road paths, and they're heading uphill towards what's called a rim road, which is a road to get in and out of the forest. The area they were working on was called Turkey Springs. They see in the canopy level of the trees about a half a mile ahead of them what appears to be a large orangey, sometimes a bluish-green light. It's vacillating and it's undulating, and they think it might be a plane crash. They can't make it out. It's much like fire undulates and has real brightness to it and can be bright orange or bright yellow. This looked like that. And it was shining a little bit through the trees at them, and their immediate thought was, oh, my gosh, it's a plane crash. Now, it wasn't dark yet. It was about 6 o'clock, but the sun was going down. This was in November, so they only had about a half hour of daylight. They pulled up to this area, and they were all curious. It had gotten their attention. They knew it wasn't the moon, and they knew it wasn't the sun, because they could see the moon behind them coming up, and the sun had already started to go down on the horizon, and they could see that through the trees on the opposite side of them. So as they got closer, they got to a clearing in the trees, and it was as clear as day to all of them. It was a shimmering, probably I would say around a 30-foot hovering disc. It was hovering at about 15 to 20 feet off the ground. It was below the canopy of the trees, within the canopy of the surrounding trees that were standing there that were upwards of 60 and 70 feet tall. So it was hiding. If you were at the top of the canopy of the trees, it was below some of the trees. But there was a clearing. There was an opening. There had a tree that had been cut the year before that kind of created this like 30-foot diameter in the canopy, and it was nestled in this canopy of the trees. And it was undulating slightly, spinning slightly, and you could see a frame of the craft through the light that was coming through the skin of the craft. Now, Travis was sitting in the passenger side door, and he just assumed this thing was going to take off in a split second, and he wanted the closest possible look he could get, so he flung open the door and ran up right underneath it. He ran about 100 feet kind of uphill and was standing there looking at this thing. Now, at first it wasn't making noise, but then it started to make some unusual noises. First it started with a very high-pitched sound, then it started with a very, very deep, low rumble that he could even feel in the ground. The guys in the truck said they could feel this sound. And Travis thought, well, maybe he'd kind of done something stupid, so he tried to jump a little bit closer towards the craft and hide behind one of these 4-foot stacked slash piles that they had created a couple weeks before. And he was actually almost right under the craft at this point, staring up at it, looking at it, and the noise and the intensity and the vibration started to increase. Travis also said that he felt like maybe static electric charge starting to build up. He wasn't sure, but he began to realize that something was going to happen, and he probably needed to get back to the truck. And the boys in the truck were hollering at him, "Get the heck back in the truck." So he stood up quickly to run back to the truck, and at the moment that he stood up, he blacked out, and what the boys saw from the truck is him being hit by a beam of some sort, like a bluish, greenish, yellowish, bolt that hit him, and it was about as wide as his chest, so maybe that's 2 feet across or so, and 2 feet wide. This bolt picked him up. As soon as he went to stand up, it hit him, and it flew him up higher than he actually could have jumped and repelled him back about 15 to 20 feet. Travis landed in a heap without any attempt to break his fall, and when he was picked up, he seemed to be picked up by his chest, and he was pushed back as if a grenade had gone off. One of the other guys had been in the service, and he said, I thought there was an explosion, because that's what it felt like, and that's what it looked like to them. They saw Travis lying in a heap, far away from where he had been standing. They assumed he was dead, and they assumed the craft was going to hit them next. So they slammed the door and they drove away, absolutely terrified, confused, frightened, and, driving faster than they should through the forest. They get up to what's called the Rim Road, which is about 10 minutes away, the way they were driving. Really, it's probably about a 20-minute drive, but they got there in about 10 minutes. They stopped the truck. The driver of the truck realized that he couldn't leave Travis there because Travis is either dead or dying, and they really need to go back and pick him up. Travis was his best friend, and they needed to be brave and figure out what to do. And he didn't want to endanger any of the other men's life, so he said, you can all get out of the truck, you can all stay here, I'm going back, I'm going to go get Travis, and I have to get him to a hospital or something. None of the other guys wanted to be alone in the forest. It was already starting to get dark now, and they didn't know what was up, so they all climbed back into the truck, and they went back to the site. So while they're driving, they can still see the craft in the canopy of the trees. Now they're coming downhill towards the craft, and all of a sudden they see the craft fly away. So they know the craft isn't there. So they speed up, they get to the spot where the tires had spun out, they could see where they had been parked. They knew the slash piles in this forest because they had built them all in the last, 2 months of their contract. So they stopped the truck, turn it up on an angle towards where Travis was so they could help see him, because by this point it's dark. They have one flashlight between them, and they start looking for Travis. And they're calling for him, and they're walking slash pile to slash pile all on a line, and they can't find Travis. He's nowhere to be found. They spend about 45 minutes there. A couple of the men completely break down, collapse in tears. They're just panicked. They're feeling guilty. You can imagine the gamut of emotions running through these boys' minds. And they decide that they have to go to town. Now, it's 45 minutes to drive to the closest small town, which is called Heber. This town doesn't even have a traffic light in it, I think, even still to this day. You have to drive outside of town either way to a traffic light. And there's a small dirt road that is a switchback and very rough at times and very narrow that they have to drive down. So it's not something you can race down. It's not a paved road. And at times the road washes out year to year and has to be rebuilt. So they head down this rocky road, switched back. They get to Heber. They have 40 minutes to decide what they're going to do. They know they have to call the police. But some of the guys have had, brushes with the law. A little bit of pet thievery. One guy stole the car once. They're thinking, man, I don't want to have anything to do with the law. They're not going to believe this cockamamie story. They're going to throw us in jail. Travis is gone. They're not going to believe us. They're going to think we killed Travis. I mean, they were expecting the worst, and they didn't want anything to do with calling the police. But they knew that they had to, because if they didn't, how are they going to explain what happened to Travis? So they go down, and one of the guys named Kenny Peterson calls the local sheriff. He doesn't say anything about a UFO. He said they need help. One of their crew members had gone missing in the forest, and the crew had just come out of the forest, and they were needed to report him missing, and they needed to get help. So the sheriff they called said, stay right there. I'll meet you. I'll come to the gas station where you're parked. Don't anybody leave the scene. I'll be there in 45 minutes, because everything is 45 minutes from one another. These three small towns are quite a distance. So they sit there. It's about probably 8:30 by the time the sheriff shows up, and he immediately suspects, something's up. Maybe they're smoking something. Maybe they're drinking something. He takes them aside all one by one to find out what happened. He doesn't get them all in a group to tell the story. He wants to hear it each individually from each of them, which was kind of smart. And they all tell him the same story. Of course, he doesn't believe them. He calls in some other support, and three of the crew go back up to the forest. Two of the other guys were just petrified, and they weren't prepared to go up. They wouldn't go back in the forest. In fact, they never went back in the forest. That whole work crew broke apart and never worked again together. So three of the guys went back up with two deputy sheriffs who showed up on the scene, and they couldn't find Travis either. So they come back down. It's now about midnight, and they start to put a search party together to go out at 5 in the morning when the sun is up, or 5:30 when, dawn breaks. So this search party, including Navajo Search and Rescue, some ambulance and firefighter workers, many, many, many people of these three small towns called Holbrook, Snowflake, and Heber volunteered over 5 days to look for Travis Walton. They got dogs out to sniff for them. They had sergeants on horseback. They had people in helicopters looking for him. Nothing turns up. Nobody can find him. There are UFO groups that show up, and of course, this makes national news. It breaks in the paper, and before you know it, it makes international news, and the phones are ringing off the hook in Heber. These poor sheriffs can hardly sleep. Their phones don't stop ringing. People from India and China and Japan and Russia and Belgium and Holland and every cockamamie UFO group you can imagine is calling them as well. So what happens is these boys are accused of murder because they can't find the body, and they're really interrogated quite a bit. Certainly during the search party, they're all expected to go out and search, and each one is separated from another and put in a different search party, and a sheriff or a marshal interrogates them the whole time they're searching. And usually it got violent with a couple of the guys because these are macho guys, and they're pretty rough and tumble. And usually the sheriff would say to them, look, maybe you didn't kill him. Maybe one of the other guys did. But you're going to be held accountable, and you're going to go to jail, and you can hang just like everybody else unless you start to come clean and start to give us some information. And this was happening to all the guys, and all the guys were saying, damn it, you're not listening to us. We didn't kill him. Travis was our friend. We didn't cut him up and bury him. He's not here. He was taken by this craft. He had to be. That's the only thing that could have happened. So they all undertook lie detector tests because the police, of course, didn't believe them. And the lie detection test took place on the 5th day, which I believe was Sunday, the 11th of November. Travis went missing on the 5th. This was 5 days later on the 11th. And they all were held up at the local courthouse while a search party was continuing to look for Travis. Each one of them underwent a 2-hour lie detection test. And essentially, one of them had such huge nervous tension because he had a bit of a record, and he assumed he didn't understand what was going on. He didn't realize he was going to have to answer the same question like 25 or 30 times to see if he answered it differently. And he got really frustrated and angry and said, I already answered that question. And he assumed they were trying to make him look guilty. And he pulled off all the wires and walked out of the test before it was done. So his test was inconclusive. But up until the point where he pulled off all the wires, he had passed. He just didn't finish. The 5 other guys of the 6 who were tested all passed the test. So they knew that they had to start considering the possibility that these guys were telling the truth. That night, at about midnight on Sunday the 11th, Travis was actually returned by this craft that had taken him. Travis didn't remember being picked up by the craft, but interestingly, he woke up on board the craft and was in terrible pain. His retrospect is that he was probably being healed. They probably killed him accidentally, and he was being healed on board this craft, and he woke up midway through that process, and he encountered 3 gray aliens that were about 4 feet tall that were surrounding him. And Travis had a very different experience than a lot of other people who have abduction experiences and claim that they're having experiments done on them, sometimes sexual experiments, things like this, or they're naked. That was not Travis's case. He was not naked. He had some sort of device laying across his chest where he was hit by this beam. His shirt was just kind of pushed up. These 3 beings were very frightened when Travis got angry, regained enough of his strength to jump off the table, and started grabbing what looked like medical tools he picked up, and he was flailing at these beings who were just staring at him in complete shock that Travis had the wherewithal to do that. And they promptly left the room because they couldn't gain control of him. I think they stared at him for a while and lifted their hands to try to possibly bring him under some sort of mental control or maybe some sort of paralyzation of some sort that many people experience when they encounter grays. And this didn't happen. Maybe because Travis had been electrocuted or hit by this electromagnetic beam or whatever it is. I'm making assumptions in those statements because we don't know what hit him. But some sort of energy hit Travis and knocked him out. And whatever that was, maybe it short-circuited his electrical circuit. And these beings could not gain control through his central nervous system or through his eyes. So they left the room and left him, as far as he knew, alone in this craft. He didn't know it was the craft that he had seen until a little later. He wandered around the craft. He found what he believed to be a navigation room with a single chair in it that looked like a large egg with a side of it that was scooped out. If you can imagine, like a hard-boiled egg that sits upright, and just the side of it is kind of scooped out for a chair that had handles in it. There was nothing in the room except that. The room, although there was a doorway he walked through, it appeared that there were other doorways or seams in this craft, but he couldn't figure out how to open any of these other doors. So he walked close to the chair. As he got close to the chair, something astonishing happened, which also freaked him out. The room became a planetarium, 360 degrees, like an IMAX theater, but all around. The floor, the walls, the ceiling, and complete surrounding him. And it was stars, as if he had stepped out into outer space, and the only thing was there between him and the floor was this chair. He actually sat down in the chair and started to play with some of the buttons on these armrests of these chairs. He could see little screens that he described now he can describe it, but in the day, in 1975, he didn't quite know how to describe it, but it was almost like what you might think of as an iPhone screen, but with squiggly lines like a screensaver in them. And as he pushed and played with the buttons, the lines moved, but what also happened is in the 360-degree planetarium that was now surrounding him, the stars moved. And he didn't know if the craft was moving or just his visual perspective was moving. But it was quite disorienting to him. He was getting nauseous and dizzy and sick. And all of a sudden he heard something in the doorway. So he stood up out of this egg chair and turned around behind him to look in the doorway he had come through. And there was a man standing in the door that looked like an American astronaut. He was dressed in a tight-fitting blue jumpsuit with a black belt, some sort of black trim around the neck, black boots. He had hands like you and I. He had a glass helmet on that was kind of sterile and like an astronaut's helmet, but much more simple than our astronaut suits. I mean, this was no thickly padded suit with gloves. It was just a round glass helmet sort of attached to the outfit he was wearing that was fairly tightly fitted. This was a large person, a little taller than Travis, who was I think Travis was about 6 feet. I think this man was a little taller than him, very muscular, blonde hair to about his chin, and bluish goldeny eyes that really got Travis's attention. He said there was something unusual about the eyes. Although the eyes looked like ours, they were somehow goldeny blue and just different than eyes he had ever seen. Someone mentioned to him when I was with him that had he ever studied some of the eyes in Greek statues of some of the mythological gods from Greece. And Travis said, yeah, it was kind of like that. They had a goldeny blue hue to them. So he ran up to this man in the doorway and started babbling to him, like, where am I? What's wrong? Are you going to take me back? I'm in terrible pain. I can hardly breathe. I need help. Can you help me? Are you an astronaut? This being said nothing to him. Took him by the arm rather forcefully, led him out of this room, which we'll call a navigation room for lack of a better description, and led him down a curved hallway inside the craft to another hallway that led to the outside of this craft. They went through a set of double doors that opened, and immediately Travis could breathe much, much better than he could while he was inside the craft. Travis described the craft as being very musty and very difficult to breathe, but as soon as these doors opened into maybe an airlock of some sort in the craft and closed behind him, he could smell the fresh air from outside. Then the outer doors of the craft opened, and they were suddenly walking forward. They were standing on the rim edge of this disc that he had seen in the forest. He recognized the outside of the craft. It's what he had seen. There was a ramp that led down to a floor surface that appeared to be like a tarmac of some sort, and he was in some sort of very large hangar, like an aircraft carrier hangar of some sort, except there were no typical airplanes in this hangar. The ceiling was much shaped like a hangar. It was curved, but it had panels in it that were lit. Either it was electric light or there was sun coming through smoked or clouded, ceiling panels. Some were dark and some were light. And this was a semicircle, half-curved ceiling wall that connected to a flat, straight wall like a building. In this hangar, which was quite large, there were about 5 or 6 other craft, other discs, different from the disc he had gotten out of. These looked more like shiny, metallic metal bullets that were large. So they were more like egg-shaped or oval-shaped, and they were very shiny, metallic, and he could see the tarmac floor reflected into the bottom of them and the ceiling reflected into the top of them, and they seemed to be balanced without any kind of feet holding them up. He said there were about 5 of them, and they were different sizes. They weren't all the same size. So that's interesting to me because obviously he's now encountered 2 different species of extraterrestrial beings, for lack of a better description, and different craft. It also appears to me, from reading and knowing and learning the story, that these beings were collaborating or working together, that the Greys must have docked or landed in some sort of mothership or underground base. It's all conjecture. We have no way to know where Travis was. But this man who was with him, who appeared to be a man, I'll call them, for lack of a better term, a Nordic, because he fits many of the descriptions of Nordics with blonde hair and blue eyes. This Nordic walked him across this tarmac by these other ships and into a building where there were doors that opened, sliding doors that slid open and slid behind him, I am pretty sure. Travis described that. Down the hallway, they turn to the right, then they turn to the left, they go into a room, and they encounter 3 other interesting Nordics. These people don't have helmets, but they're dressed in the same suits. There's 1 woman and 2 men. The Nordic with the helmet that led him there promptly lets go of him, passes him off to these 3 other Nordics, turns around and leaves. Now, meanwhile, nobody has said a thing to Travis. Nobody's communicated anything with him. And he's babbling the whole time. Where am I? Who are you? Are you going to take me back? What's going on? What are these other ships? He's got no information, not even telepathic information. When he's given to these 3 other Nordics, they want him to sit down on another bed or table. It appears to be like a medical room, although it's very different than a medical room we would go into, say, at a local hospital. But there is a bed there. They want him to lie down on this metallic-like bed. He doesn't want to. He can tell they're sort of looking at each other, kind of maybe telepathically communicating. He's not sure, but he knows they want him to lie down, and he doesn't want to. He wants them to answer their questions because he's getting fed up now. He's curious, he's confused, he's injured, he's hurt, he's dehydrated, he's thirsty. He wants some answers. And they force him up onto this bed. They're very strong. And the 2 guys force him down, and the woman has in her hand what looks like an oxygen mask. Except it's not attached to anything. It's just freely sitting in her hand. And in the center of it is something very dark or black. And she forces this over his nose and mouth so that he's forced to breathe this whatever is in this mask. He pushes her away, gets his fingers under the edge of the mask, goes to push it away, and he's unsuccessful. She forces it on him, and he goes back out. He loses consciousness. And that's all he remembers from his period of time on the ship. But on Sunday, the 11th of November, he wakes up on the side of the road outside of Heber. This is the next time he has conscious recall. His body is warm. He has the same clothes on he had on up in the forest. He doesn't know where he is at first. It's a little damp out, and it's pretty late. It's midnight, although he doesn't know that. And he also doesn't know it's 5 days later. He sees a light around him. He's literally lying half on a road and half on the gravel on the side of a paved road. He sees a light, and he looks up expecting to see a street light because there aren't any in Heber. It's such a small town, and he doesn't know where he is. He looks up, and there's no street light. It's the craft he saw in the forest, and it's beaming a light down around him, like a little circular light. As soon as he looks up at the craft, the light shoots back up into the craft, the bottom of the craft door closes, and the craft takes off at lightning speed. It's the same craft that he saw 5 days before, 45 minutes from there, up on this plateau, on this rim in the middle of the Sitgraves forest. So he's pretty disoriented. He's starting to get cold now. I mean, his clothes were warm. He said there was warm air between his body and the surface of his clothes. But, as soon as he stood up, he's starting to get cold because it's November. It's probably 30 degrees out. So he sees lights, and the road kind of curves downhill. He can see lights ahead of him, and he starts walking down this curved road to see where the lights are. Maybe he can find a phone booth. Maybe he can call somebody. Maybe he can knock on somebody's door. Maybe he can get help. He's pretty weak. And he's still in some pain. He's disoriented. He's freaked out. He is totally freaked out. And he walks out of town. He realizes it's the town of Heber, which is the closest town to where they would drive. They would pull into the town of Heber, pull off on a side road by a gas station, and get onto a dirt road to head up to work every day. So this was where the road led them out of the forest every day, which is really interesting that this craft dropped him there. Obviously, there's some kind of intelligence there. Had they dropped him back off in the forest, he never would have made it to help. In November, no one was up in the forest, although there were some cabins up there. It's unlikely he could have gotten into any of them or found any of them because it's totally pitch black up there. There's no electric up there, and it would have been a 45-minute drive in a four-wheel drive truck to get to Heber. So there was some conscious thought to dropping him off. There was also some conscious thought, I think, on the part of these extraterrestrials that they made sure he was awake before they left him. They didn't leave him unconscious on the side of the road for a truck to run over him or something. So he goes into town, which is not really a town. There's, very little in the small town of Heber where he was. He finds a phone booth with 3 phone booths to it. And one of them doesn't work. He goes in the middle one, finds a dial tone. At that period of time in 1975, you could dial O for an operator and make a collect call. We don't have very many of those phones around anymore. The local operator that picks up recognizes his voice. She also recognizes that he's calling a family member. Travis called his sister and brother-in-law who lived not far away. They didn't live right in Heber, but they lived in the next town over. And he called them and said, "Can you come pick me up? This is Travis." Now, the family didn't believe it was Travis at first. They didn't even recognize his voice. You have to understand that this sister-in-law and the sister and brother-in-law were being hounded by people calling from every potential UFO group and the military was calling, the local police were calling, friends and neighbors were calling, the local parishes were calling. Most of these men were Mormon. So they came from a fairly strict, Mormon community. All Holbrook, Snowflake, and Heber all have very large Mormon populations. So you can imagine the phone calls that the family had been getting. And they thought this was one more prank call. That somebody was being really cruel and was just calling and saying, "It's Travis, come pick me up." But, of course, it was Travis. And he implored and begged his brother-in-law not to hang up on him. Now, what he didn't realize is not only did his brother-in-law pick up the phone, but also his brother who lived in Phoenix named Dwayne was also there. He had stayed with his sister while the search was ensuing for Travis. So he was on the other end of the phone as well. He heard Travis's voice. He recognized Travis's voice. He said, "Hold on there. Stay there in the phone booth. We'll come get you." And so it was Travis's brother-in-law and brother Dwayne who showed up to get him in that phone booth in Heber. After Travis knew help was coming, he literally just passed out. He collapsed. I don't even think he hung up the phone. He collapsed in the phone booth, sort of like it was a collapsing door, like a folding door. The door was pushed closed when his brother showed up, and they had to kind of wake him up by pushing in on the door, pushing in on Travis to get him to get out of the phone booth. And Travis was panicked. I mean, he had dropped back into some form of unconsciousness. And when his brother was there trying to get him, Travis was screaming because I guess he thought something weird was going on again, or he had dropped back into the memory of this, rescue mission that had just happened aboard this craft with beings that he didn't know from what world they were. Eventually, Travis recognized his brother and went to him, climbed into his arms, and the brother-in-law and brother put him in the front of the cab of their truck and drove him home as Travis just wept. He said he was crying continually, trying to tell him the story of what had happened. And during that process of speaking with his brother Dwayne, that's when Travis first learned that 5 days had transpired and that he had been missing for 5 days. And this came as a really terrible shock to Travis. He just could not imagine how he had been gone for 5 days. And his brother said, "Travis, feel your face," which he did, and he had a 5 days growth of beard. He had a watch on which never stopped working, and it had a clock in the watch for the date. And, of course, the date had changed, and he was just really disoriented. He had lost about 12 pounds. He was terribly dehydrated and very, very hungry. So this is where we went into all of this in the film, but this is where Travis sort of re-entered into civilization and tried to begin to start to wrap his brain around what had happened to him. He, of course, wanted to fully cooperate with police, with law enforcement, with the local UFO groups who were there trying to get information. But he was so disoriented, he really didn't even make any decisions as to what was going to happen in the next ensuing days. His brother, Dwayne, had a sense of the media frenzy which was about to take place. And he really protected Travis from that because he knew Travis wasn't it was not in any shape to make any kind of coherent sense. And he would be totally vulnerable to attacks and ridicule. And Travis had been through enough already. So Dwayne started managing Travis's care, taking him to a hospital, trying to find people that that were trustworthy to talk to, trying to get possibly a regression done, trying to get maybe a hypnosis session of some sort to be able to help Travis deal with the post-traumatic stress that he was experiencing, because Travis was on the verge of a really a mental and emotional breakdown. As soon as he began to talk or even think about what happened, he just went into this panic attack that would prevent him from speaking. I mean, he would just literally, talk himself into a circle until nothing else was coming out. So he was not in very good shape and really not in the place to meet with the public or to meet with the local police or to answer questions. It just wasn't going to happen. So that's the basic story in a nutshell. Travis wrote a book called Fire in the Sky, which recounts the entire story that he had and also the story that a lot of the crew shared with him as well. And that story was optioned and then made into a film by Paramount Pictures called Fire in the Sky. And Tracy Torme was the director of that film. The film departed from the true experiences that happened to Travis. Hollywood can do that. They have the license to do anything they want. They didn't feel like they were under any obligation to abide by the true story, as Travis had hoped that they would. And the story that Fire in the Sky told was true to the basic general story. They combined some of the work crew together, and they combined some of the characters in Travis's family in with some of the work crew. That way they didn't have to have as many actors in the film. They also severely diverged from the actual events that happened to Travis on board the craft. They tried to mimic some of the story, but they really took it out of context, and they made it even more scary than it was for Travis. And he was always very frustrated and maybe a little resentful that he was naive enough to think they were going to make the true story, and they didn't. And that's one of the things that Travis actually shared with me when we first met and had dinner in Roswell in 2010 with Peter Robbins. He said he was waiting for a really good new film to be made. And at that point, I didn't presume that I was capable of doing that. I'm not a Hollywood producer. I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I live in Philadelphia, and I don't have access to the types of resources and funds and skills and talent that a Hollywood company would. But was a challenge, and it was a intriguing proposition to me that if I could make something really good and I could impress Travis, maybe I could actually even sell the film. And that's the next goal that I have. I'm really hoping that at some point I'm able to sell my production to maybe sci-fi, I'm hoping, or maybe history or discovery, someone else who'd be interested in airing it, and someone who would help me recap the personal expenses that I put into the film. Because I didn't take the time to do crowdfunding and raise funds. I basically underwrote it myself. And so that's the next stage. I'm challenging myself to learn how to find a distributor and how to work with a network and how to sell what I've done now. So
wish you the best of, I was saying I wish you the best of luck.
That's a good jumping off point there.
Yeah, I do wish you the best of luck, and no doubt this case will wake a lot of people up. But I wanted to ask, have any people in perhaps the ET contactee, psychic, Akashic Records community approached you and told you any thoughts or hunches they may have as to who the ETs were and where they came from, or maybe when they came from, if they were time travelers or anything like that? Anybody talk to you about identifying the ETs and the UFO craft and all that?
Well, there have been a number of people at many different screenings and lectures that I've been at with Travis that have approached both of us with, like, complete knowledge. We know, I got a psychic download. And, they're not all the same. It's not like we have a repeat pattern that we're seeing that, this psychic said that, this psychic said that, this psychic said that. I respect psychic information. I am gifted myself. I'm actually quite a very good dowser, and I've gotten information myself, which was very useful and important and pertinent for me in my own life, and I listened to it. But in terms of that helping me or helping Travis, it's not something I was certainly going to put in the film, and I don't rely on that for, say, information that I put out there as fact. As a documentary filmmaker, I really try to stay as true to reliable source information as I can, because I think there needs to be a clarity when you're working. And in this field, when you get into anything like ghosts or UFOs or the paranormal, you start to bite off, Pandora's box, right? And all sorts of things come out of Pandora's box. And it's very, very hard in this field to know where firm ground is under you and where it's not. And if I'm going to try to create any kind of legitimacy, certainly for Travis, I try to stay on the cautious side of, commenting on psychic material.
Well, that's fair enough, but I love MUFON, no question. I'll be at the next conference in the Langhorne area when it comes up later this year, and no doubt I'll do another special, 1-hour special with John Ventry as a preview for that. But I got to ask you about this. It's a hard question to ask, but it's a fair question. What do you have to say to all those people who say that MUFON is like a little too left-brained? I mean, at the last conference in Langhorne, there was that one speaker who was talking about how time-traveling ETs, he said time travel is not possible because of the grandfather paradox, and I swear I was on the verge of jumping out of my seat saying, yo, dude, ever heard of alternate timelines or something like that? It boggles my mind that he couldn't imagine maybe the ETs came from another timeline which will not cause a paradox. And John Ventry, he admitted, I respect people who want to be like spiritual and all, and I understand that UFO and ETs, that's kind of where the rubber meets the road in regards to transitioning to all the spiritual, metaphysical stuff, but he prefers not to go there. He prefers to stick to nuts and bolts fact, and many people criticize MUFON for that. If that's the way MUFON wants to go, then by all means stick to that if that's their prerogative, but do you think maybe it is a bad idea because it's a little too, as they say, left-brained and closed-minded?
Well, I would say you might be jumping to some assumptions, and maybe drawing a conclusion prematurely. Because there was a speaker at a conference doesn't mean that all the speakers that come and present are presenting the ideas of MUFON. We do try to vet some of our speakers. We think different speakers provide good avenues for people to think. You've probably heard of the scientific method, and it's a methodology upon which you try to test particular hypotheses based on facts. It's the only thing we really have to build strong foundations, which are important when you're trying to do things like launch rockets into space, or eventually take people to Mars, or build a space station. You have to know that what you're basing your understanding on is reliable. So there is a place for science. And just because one speaker didn't have exposure or understanding to the nature of time and space travel doesn't mean that we can't transcend time and that science isn't on the verge of discovering that. I would say, in fact, we are. And when you talk with some quite interesting physicists, they will tell you that. I'm not a physicist, although I do have a bit of a scientific background. I have a bachelor's in science, but I have an appreciation for the scientific method. So I think that MUFON is taking a good approach, having a scientific platform, but it doesn't mean it's not their only platform. And speakers that come to conferences don't necessarily always represent the views of MUFON's research. So that's my best answer in a nutshell.
Yeah. Do you have anything to say about the conspiracy theory that the CIA has infiltrated MUFON? Because I've heard some people express concern about that. Do you have any comments about that?
Well, I would say the CIA is probably not doing its job if they haven't, in some ways, infiltrated, whether it's a direct agent or whether it's people that are just informants. I think that the military is going to want to know what we are reporting, what we're talking about, what's being seen. And if I was head of the military, I would want an informant that I would send out to UFO conferences and, other UFO groups and paranormal groups and say, tell me what you know. If there's something they're trying to keep secret, it would give them good information as to how to do a spin on something that's come out so that people would doubt it and wouldn't take it seriously. That's been the ongoing story since the inception of the UFO phenomenon, right after the atomic bomb was, used in the Second World War. That's when we had the onslaught of UFO sightings. So nothing's really changed. I think it's the same mode of operandus. And, that's the most honest and objective answer I can give you. I don't know people who have identified themselves as being informants or working for the CIA, but there are many people that come out of high military levels that come into MUFON. So it's very hard to do a vetting process. Just because somebody has a military background doesn't necessarily mean that they're a military informant. It might mean just the opposite, that things that they experienced while they were in the military so profoundly affected them that they think that humanity should explore this, be open about it, that it shouldn't be secret, and that eventually we're going to have to deal with this awareness. And we should begin to start a strategy approach that's in the civilian sector, like who is going to be the spokesperson for humanity? Stanton Friedman speaks very eloquently about this, and it's a very important point. Very few universities want to touch this topic with a 10-foot pole. The only one I know of that did a long, in-depth 5-year study was Penn State. They took an interdisciplinary approach to eventual ET contact and what we might like to set up as public policy around these issues and what issues are at stake. It's a quite elaborate, in-depth report. I recommend it to people if they want to pursue this avenue.
Can't help but wonder if maybe Penn State's trying to redeem itself for the whole Sandusky sex scandal, so now they're going
Yeah,
over
this was
the edge.
actually going on during that.
Oh.
It started. It was a 5-year study, and it preceded that debacle that happened. And I think they actually finished it before he was fired. So it was quite unfortunate. I don't know the details behind that sex scandal in any depth at all. I really did not follow it, but yeah, I know it was quite sad.
Yeah, I'm sure they killed Joe Paterno too. But anyway, I'm digressing. Let's get back to the subject matter about ancient archaeology, because you're into that, and I got to bring up the fact that John Ventry, he was pissed off when Hangar 1, the UFO Files new season, was not going to air, but the new season of Ancient Aliens was going to air. He suggested that we boycott Ancient Aliens, but I suggested in a comment that I made on Facebook in response, I said, nah, Ancient Aliens shouldn't be boycotted. It does have the ability to wake some people up, and in regards to, like, among other things, ancient archaeology. But although I said I think we should raise hell about the fact that Hangar 1 was canceled, especially considering that when I had Bill Burns of UFO Hunters fame on my show, he, for all intents and purposes, all but acknowledged that the reason the new season that was announced, that was supposed to air, of UFO Hunters around like 2010 or something like that, the reason it didn't air was because the show had aired a little too much information, and the powers that be did not want that information to come out. So I have no doubt that that's the same thing that happened with Hangar 1. And of course, if you do the following, History Channel, which airs Ancient Aliens, is ultimately owned by Disney. Disney is a major Illuminati operation. You connect the dots. That says a lot. So, but all that aside, in regards to ancient archaeology, you're big on that, and Ancient Aliens, like I said, even though it does speculate in a lot of crazy ways, it does have the potential to wake people up with ancient archaeology, among other things. What do you see is of utmost importance in regards to appreciating ancient archaeology?
What's most important about ancient archaeology?
Yeah, you said you want to. Yeah, one of your causes to have people appreciate ancient archaeology.
Oh, yes. Yes, I actually have many speakers come and present on ancient sites, and I take some summer months when I can afford it, and go to visit some of the most profound ancient sites. I've been to Egypt, in Peru. I've been to Pumapuca, and a number of sites in what's called the Urubamba Valley, like Ollantaytambo and Machu Picchu. I've been down to Nazca. I've been over to Egypt. I don't know if I mentioned that. I also have spent some time in England around Stonehenge. And I've been to lesser-known ancient sites around this country, like many of our mounds throughout Ohio and up into Canada are quite interesting. We tend to think that America doesn't have an ancient history, but in fact we probably have a very interesting history, although it may not be as old as some other places. It's certainly got some, I guess you call it I'm blanking on the right word, some enigmas. Certainly the ancient mounds are enigmas, and we don't understand who built them, who made them. So I think that in the future as well, we're going to begin to piece together more about the significance of civilization on this planet. We may have gone through series of complete destructions and rebirth of humanity. A lot of things that we attest to possibly being ancient aliens might possibly have been an advanced culture in the distant past, which was annihilated by maybe some galactic forces, powers of our sun, or an incoming planetary body that collided with our planet, possibly moving our planet to a different spot in our solar system where we are now. That's in the ancient cuneiform record. So maybe some of these ancient sites predated that. There's so many things we have yet to really fully put together. And for me, there's a couple of really big missing puzzle pieces. And we don't really even know what dark matter and dark energy is yet. And that makes up 96% of the known universe. So we have a long way to go, in our complete understanding of human history and history of our solar system, understanding of the physics of our galaxy and the importance that plays in our Milky Way, and in how that fits in with all the other galaxies that are in the known universe. There are so many unanswered questions. There's not enough time to be bored in the day and not enough time to read and study and explore all the things that should be uncovered.
Well, that's one of my jobs as a host of this radio show, to help expose the nature of reality. And believe me, nobody on this world has a more difficult time understanding the nature of reality than me. That's why I'm the host of this show, and that's why I invite people like you to come on the show. And I think here comes the time for, we got about half an hour left until the live feed goes off. Just want to make that clear. I don't know if we're going to have any callers on this show. But anyway, some of your other causes. I noticed you in your bio, it said gun control legislation. Like I said during my intro, I don't want to get all buddy-buddy about this, but Jennifer, you do realize that Sandy Hook, Columbine, and a lot of other shootings were actually Illuminati staged just by taking the guns, and the reason they want to take the guns is so that they can control us and inflict tyranny on us. I mean, I'm assuming you were aware of that when you want gun control legislation. Were you?
Well, it's very interesting. You put a lot of thoughts and ideas together in that sentence, and it's a heated sentence. You may very well be right, and I am not sure if that was some staged plan to take away our guns. It'd be a shame if it was. I think that we should continue to preserve our right to own guns. I'm of Jewish background. If the Jews in Nazi Germany were allowed to hold on and defend themselves, maybe the Holocaust as it was would not have been the way it was or turned out the way it was. Maybe there would have been groups that could have revolted sooner or small militias that could have formed. I think that the unique thing about our country is that we built in the right to form a militia, and we built in the right in our Constitution to fight against the things we think are wrong, which if an Illuminati exists, we should have the right to fight against them. And, of course, we need to preserve our right to bear arms to do that. But I think that the way we own guns and the laws which protect our rights to own those guns are unique in our country in that they change state by state. So you can have two states completely next to each other that have completely different laws around gun ownership. And I live in an area of northeast part of the country where both New York, New Jersey, and Maryland, all states surrounding me, even including Ohio, have created smarter, more sensible laws around handguns. Now, the organization that I had worked with in the past, I sat on a board with, I did some fundraising and some film work with, was called Ceasefire. And Ceasefire's platform has nothing to do with taking away people's rights to bear arms. That's a misconception, and many people jump to that conclusion right away, and that's a shame. But they haven't bothered to sit down and read the bylaws before they make those comments, so it's understandable. But the reason I got involved in this is one of my daughter's best friends at 14 years old was shot and killed by a stalker who was stalking her mother and her grandparents. He should not have had the right to buy a gun because he was mentally ill. There were access and available background records to check. Had he been forced or required to get a background check, he did not. If he had lived in New Jersey, he would not have been able to buy a gun because there's checks and balances in place to prevent that. He had already had a record for mental instability. But instead, he bought two handguns and killed his entire family, including my daughter's best friend. Now, my daughter often went to her house. She could have easily gone home with her that day when he was waiting for her to come in the door after soccer practice and shot everyone. We dropped her off many times. We didn't drop her off that day, but we very well could have. So I myself am responding to a family tragedy that affected our community. It was just a stunning turn of fate that took the life of Alex Wake, one of my daughter's friends. And it's at that point that I began to think seriously about, okay, what do we need to do in this country? Why do we have the laws that we have? How and why did this man have the ability to get a gun? He did the killing. It wasn't the gun that did it. I completely get that. But it was an unstable person with a gun at the wrong time. So it's a bad mix. The same issues were dealt with when you look at the situation of automobiles and alcohol. Prohibition was a period of time we went through where everyone thought that no one should have the right to drink alcohol. And eventually we came back to our senses and said, no, we can have moderation, and we can enforce that moderation. And then we had to figure out how we were going to enforce moderation and still let people drive a car. Because if you're intoxicated and you get in a car, you can kill somebody. Just like if you're intoxicated and you pick up a gun, you can kill somebody. So at some point, we need to value the right to life and innocent people's rights to life, as opposed to our right to have privileges. We have many privileges in this country, but we don't have the privilege to take innocent people's lives. And we need to be smart about how we put in safeguards that still allow us to have the privileges we want and protect the most amount of people. And more, we are seeing instances where terribly innocent people's lives are lost, and it's a shocking tragedy, and it's so unnecessary. So how do we prevent these Columbines, these Aurora movie theater killings, these, Sandy Hook elementary school killings? I don't know, but I think there needs to be a conversation and a dialogue about it. And one of the things the organization that I was working with was creating what we called no-brainer type legislation, simple legislation that have been enacted in other states very successfully. If you go back to the 1970s, it was unsafe to go into New York City and get on a subway at night. You were held up by gunpoint or stabbed or robbed or mugged, and it was a joke if you were stupid enough to go to New York. The theater district was falling off. 42nd Street was not a street you could walk down. And New York, like Pennsylvania, is a big hunting state with lots of open space for people to hunt and lots of hunters. They came up with very sensible legislation in New York City and in highly condensed, metropolitan areas, where they created what I would call sane handgun laws around handguns, and that's the only thing I've ever dealt with, not rifles or semi-automatic machine guns. That's a whole other topic. But I believe that if New York City could do it, Philadelphia can do it. And the reason Philadelphia has not done it is part of the politics and part of the, I would say, the misunderstandings connected to the politics have prevented Pennsylvania from being able to make what I call the sensible steps in the same direction. But New Jersey did it, and Maryland did it, New York did it, but because we were following those states, we have now had a bottleneck in our Pennsylvania legislature. And there have been some very interesting, underhanded, inappropriate things done to myself and a number of other members of Ceasefire and other family members I know who lost loved ones to gun violence, who got involved in this topic and decided to try to do something about it, and very, very nasty things have been done to them. And I can usually trace those nasty things back to the NRA. So they're doing things probably illegally. Like they hired a spy to be on our board, along with a couple of other states trying to do similar things. I can tell you that the director of Ceasefire has been on a planning committee with Senator Joe Biden, trying to create uniformity to gun laws across our country. But because we have this, very diverse laws like Florida and Pennsylvania, there's almost no gun laws at all around who and how you can buy guns. Like I could go and I could buy 37 Smith and Wessons if I want, or Colt 22s or whatever, and put them in the trunk of my car. And I could actually sell them out of the trunk of my car to people who maybe have a record and couldn't buy a gun. I could sell them to local drug dealers. They'd probably be happy to buy the guns from me, and that could be a cash deal. I could sell the guns for 4 or 5 times the price I bought them for, because they can't buy them. And as long as nobody catches me, I haven't done anything illegal. There's no fail-safe, or there's no way I'm held accountable for the guns that I buy. And I just think, other states have accountability. If I go out and buy a car and somebody steals my car, I have the right to go to the police and say, hey, can you help me find my car? Here, it's registered to me. But, a gun is just as dangerous as a car, but that doesn't have to be registered to me. And if I'm stupid enough to not scratch off the serial numbers with a drill saw, right, or a skill drill before I sell them, then if that gun gets traced back to me, that I purchased it, and it was used in a crime and killed, I don't know, however many people you can imagine, I can just say to the police, I bought that gun. I don't know what happened to it. I've had it in my garage. I guess it got stolen. End of story. So there are these loopholes. There are a number of them I could go into. That's just one example. But we think that if somebody's buying a large number of cachet of arms, handguns on a regular basis, maybe you should sort of, maybe there should be a little red flag or warning sign that goes up. Maybe there should be a logical limit to the number of handguns that anyone could buy in a year. We suggested legislation to be 12 a year per person, or for a married couple, 24 a year per family of handguns. We figured one a month was probably more than most people would want to buy, but that was a good legal limit. But do you think we could get that passed? No, not in Pennsylvania. And part of it was because people didn't understand the issues, and part of it was because the NRA did a lot of poor publicity on the topic, and made our organization look like we were trying to take away their gun rights, which is not true. So it's a very complex issue, and I don't think we're going to solve it here. But I've met with a lot of family members who have lost loved ones, and they want to know what to do, and they want to begin to start to understand the process. And it's very tricky the way our politics is set up in our country around guns, with every state having different rules. One state becomes the hot spot for other people to buy and then take the guns across state lines, just like alcohol was. So we're facing very, very many similar issues to, and even drugs. In some cases, there are some states where certain drugs are allowed, and in other states they're not, and people go across the border to get access to them, and that's illegal. But yet it happens, and that's what's going on in Pennsylvania. We know it because we find guns in Camden all the time that were purchased in Philadelphia, as one example. So we're trying to work with legislators, we're trying to work with police, we're trying to work with civilians, and we're trying to set better public policy around how we're smart about how we feel about our rights and what those rights mean in balance with people's right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which means not having to worry that they're going to get killed when they go into a movie theater or a restaurant. So
that's right.
That's my little explanation of where I stand. It's not a simple issue, and it's not an all-or-one answer.
I know it isn't. And when it comes to are you better off with a gun or not having a gun, the way I see it, if you think it's a bad idea to use violence to combat violence, then you'd probably be better off without a gun. But if you think it is a good idea to use violence to try to combat violence, well, then maybe getting a gun may not be a bad idea for you. But I mean, there are situations when, like, the totality of the circumstances would require that someone's right be taken away. Like, if someone is blind, do they have the right to shoot a gun? No, because the fact that they're blind.
That's right.
Yeah, because the totality of the circumstances, because they're blind, no, you can't give them a gun. I mean, that when someone says, well, we can't give them a gun because somebody might do something. Well, no, might be a safety risk or something is never a valid excuse for taking away guns or any other right, because it's completely incompatible with the totality of the circumstances. But a lot of people are scared, so they don't seem to look at it that way, so they would give up liberty for security. But speaking of giving up liberty, this is another issue I wanted to talk about with you. Environmental awareness. It seems you're big on that, but I mentioned giving up liberty because I once again need to say, Jennifer, you do realize that the whole global warming climate change thing is one great big hoax. Any man-made cause, it's all a lie. It's designed to make us give up our rights in the name of saving the earth and give up our liberties. They say humanity's causing global warming, but they realize there's no global warming, so they call it climate change. And then they say we got to take away your rights and make you pay taxes on breathing air to save everything, and people buy it. I mean, don't get me wrong. We are, like, polluting the air with unnecessary energy that could easily be gotten rid of if we finally expose the secret technology that could get rid of it. I follow Jim Marrs' work, and I'm reading Jim Marrs' book, Population Control. He kind of talked about some of this stuff, about how the pollution can be solved if we finally got rid of showed suppressed technology, And so, yeah, there's a lot of pollution, damage to the ozone layer with chemtrails and all the other bad things, chemtrails too. But the climate change, global warming thing, that seems like where environmental activists seem to get a little confused, because I love what they do and I love signing their petitions, but when I see that they're talking about global warming and climate change, I'm like, oh my God, you guys are falling for the lie. I got to be very selective and careful with you now. So this whole environmental awareness thing, where exactly do you stand, and do you get what I'm trying to say when I say environmentalists seem confused on certain issues?
Well, I would say it pays to have an education in some of the topics which you've brought up, and then in also some other topics. Nothing is ever as simple on the surface as it seems. And that's why it's important for us not to make assumptions, and not to make assumptions about what other people know or don't know or think. I would say you brought a lot of topics to the table which could be dissected. I am not exactly 100% sure that there is a direct agenda that's being brought by, say, our government, because I think there are a lot of people in our government that are actually trying to do a decent job. But I think there are unique agencies which may be doing things that maybe are not appropriate. They always look for opportunities to make money. I wouldn't put it past some to start taxing us for our right to pollute. But, in fact, I know that exists to a certain extent. That has to do, actually, with EPA regulations, which were then decided upon by major corporations that they could trade, because if one company or corporation wasn't polluting in a way that another corporation was, they could trade those units of pollution with one another, and that's where it became quantified. So it was actually out of an early movement to limit corporations' rights to be able to pollute that those pollutant rights became defined and then eventually traded as a commodity. So it's a very complex issue, and I'm just brushing the surface of it. But there's other factors involved as well with global warming. I attend very interesting conferences with amazing scientists. These are called the Thunderbolt conferences, or they're also referred to as the Electric Universe conferences. And these conferences held in Albuquerque usually deal with the part of the world that we don't know, or the universe, the dark matter and the dark energy, and what's really out there in outer space and what's going on other planets. And then actually, many people don't realize that we are seeing similar signs of warming on many of the other planets in our solar system, not just on our Earth. We see other ice caps melting and weather changes that lead us to believe that there is an actual effect happening in our whole solar system, and it may have something to do with our sun. So there could be many factors contributing towards environmental changes. But to stick our head in the sand and think that nothing is going on or it's all a conspiracy is just as naive as to think that there isn't something going on that we don't need to pay attention to. I was a protester for some nuclear power that was going to be installed on a fault line in Arizona when I was a U of A student many, many years ago. That's where my awareness and interest in protecting the environment began, and it's continued to grow and unfold. So what I do is I support some local parks where I contribute money to help buy land and create small local urban parks, which I try to support and I garden with. I also am involved in some organic gardening groups, and I have an organic garden myself. I think it's very important for health and well-being, especially for children, to be able to have good fruits and vegetables that aren't completely covered with Roundup-ready chemicals, which may have long-term effects on their health. So to debunk environmentalists as being naive because they don't understand the complex issues that are out there could be, is a step I don't take. I realize that everything is a complex issue and needs to be taken on its own surface value for its ethical needs to be addressed. Hopefully, I've answered your question.
You definitely did. And with that said, 9.5 minutes left on the live feed. We can go past the live feed. It's just that listeners would have to call into the show. 646-478-4747 is the number. But let's try to keep this to 2 hours just for the sake of all the listeners who have lousy attention spans. So I guess the final subject in the 9 minutes and 10 seconds we have on live feed time, let's try to kill two birds with one stone here. You talked about people can't really go public about UFO experiences and ET experiences because it would destroy their life. And also this whole issue of disclosure and how we should handle it. I've heard conflicting issues about this. I recently watched Randy Kramer and Brad Johnson and some other person do a little Google Hangouts interview broadcast that they uploaded to Brad Johnson, ET Contactee's UFO, a YouTube channel. And Randy Kramer, who has allegedly, according to him, been to Mars on a couple secret missions there, he said that there are plans for disclosure, ET UFO disclosure, but they're kind of going to do it bit by bit. And the reason he gave for why they have to do it bit by bits every so often, not all at once, releasing everything at once, is because if we released it all at once, the society would fall apart. There would be chaos in the streets, like another Orson Welles' War of the Worlds radio broadcast and all that. And some people would probably commit suicide because they can't handle the truth. Now, that kind of disturbed me when I heard him say that, because I had, as a previous guest on my show, Stephen Bissett, and he's pushing the whole disclosure thing with the government. And I told him, well, a lot of people say that the government and the mainstream media need to acknowledge the UFO ET existence in order for people to believe it, but they're not going to expose it because people can't handle the truth and they'll go nuts. And Stephen Bassett said, no, Orson Welles' broadcast was then, this is now, people can handle it. And when I talked to ET contactee Ray Kusalanich, he talked about how 2017, next year, is going to be when the ETs start disclosing themselves to the public and saying, we are here, you can believe in aliens, we're here, and they're going to land their ships. And I told him, Ray, you realize people are going to go nuts, there's going to be chaos, and people are going to commit suicide when they see that. And Ray was like, no, I'm sure people can handle the truth. So this whole issue of people can or can't handle the truth, people are going to agree to disagree and agree to disagree on whether or not we should do all at once disclosure because of it. And also the whole related issue of UFO and ET, talking about it destroying one's life. 7 minutes left on the live feed. You got your floor. Tell us, how can we deal with these controversial subjects?
I don't think it's going to destroy anyone's life, but I think we would be naive to realize that it wouldn't change life dramatically in the future on this planet, and probably very rapidly, very quickly. Just as an indigenous tribe who lives in, say, the Amazon and does not have contact with the outside world and then suddenly does. what does that do to the nature of their society, of their structure, of their belief system, of how they relate to one another, to who they trust, to what they think about the outside world, to how they live their lives. I mean, it changes everything. So to think naively that things aren't going to change and aren't going to change dramatically is not right. Certainly it will be a shockwave through society, if it certainly was openly disclosed. But I think what is actually happening is something that Travis explained in the end of the film. He said that maybe they're not going with open disclosure, and maybe they're not going with completely cloaking or secrecy. Certainly, the ones that have a handle on whether or not there is disclosure or not is not necessarily our government. I think it's these visiting ETs, or maybe ETs that are actually living here in the planet. Maybe that's why they're here. Maybe this is a stopover point. I mean, obviously these are conjectures I'm throwing out, but they obviously value this planet, or they wouldn't be rendering our nuclear weapons inert, which they tend to do every time they get a chance. And they wouldn't be watching what our military is doing, which they do a lot, especially if you're in a nuclear sub and you're under the water, and there are underwater UFOs. They're in the air. Lots of people are seeing them. So when we talk about disclosure, I kind of like Nick Pope's description of it. There's either a big D disclosure or there's a little d, and people want it one way or the other. I think we've had the little d disclosure, and I think that's been happening ever since that very famous Roswell newspaper, headline that described flying saucer crashed in the plains of San Augusto, or in Roswell. That was disclosure to a certain extent. It certainly got the public's attention. It changed a lot of people's lives. It woke a whole community up. And, of course, then we started with the smoke and mirror game. Well, no, we're not really going to disclose. We're not really going to tell them the truth. So it's only people who dig that really find the information. You have to self-educate no matter what topic it is you want to study, whether it's your own health and wellness or a new cancer drug, or, your child has autism or something. And once you're faced with an issue, then you start to dig and uncover it for yourself. And those of us who have had sightings, it changes your life. It's like a balloon, and you pop it with a pin. You can't put the air back in the balloon. It's not going to go. Your life is forever changed, and you have to find a way to psychologically figure out what's firm ground under you, because you are going to spend your life facing ridicule if you talk about it. So you have to kind of learn, all right, what's safe, what's not safe, what's scientific, what's not, what can I talk about, what's going to convince or shift other people in their thinking, and how can we move forward as a society. So I think it's better that we not, play ridicule games with one another, but we come up with strategies, like long-term strategic plans of how are we going to move forward as a conscious, thinking, caring human race, and eventually meet other intelligent species. I think we should have at least some ideas about it, and we should start acting on those ideas, and we should start engaging our government in working with civilian-based groups to do that. And that alone is sort of a disclosure project and process. And I think that's what Stephen Bassett is really fighting for. I mean, he'd like to see, of course, major presidential candidates come forward, but that's political suicide. And I love Steve a lot, and I have a huge amount of respect for him, because no one else is a self-assigned disclosure lobbyist like Steve, and he's doing great, great, great work. But do I think a major presidential candidate is going to come forward? Probably not. They'll do what they can to get the vote, but once they get into office, are they going to open files? Probably not. And it's probably because they don't have any better handle on it than some of the major UFO groups that are trying to take apart the pieces and figure it out from the civilian side. But if we could work together, we might actually get somewhere. So I think we have to talk about disclosure, and it has to not be a taboo topic. And I'll leave it at that.
Fair enough. And there's no question that it's really sad, though, difference between D lowercase disclosure and D uppercase D disclosure. The lowercase D has been going on all the time, but it is, I think it's really sad, though, that if the mainstream media or the government doesn't say it, I won't believe it, which is kind of ridiculous when you realize the government media lie to us all the time. It's almost impossible to know when they're telling the truth. So anybody that says that is basically saying, I don't know what's going on. But that's the way things are, and hopefully people will soon. Well, people are waking up exponentially, they say, so sooner or later something's going to have to give. And keep up the good work, Jennifer. And I guess since we're at the end of the show now, I'll tell you the same thing I tell all of my guests. Jennifer, this was indeed a great show. I loved having you on. I learned a few things myself listening to you, even a few things about the Travis Walton case that I may not have known from some other previous documentaries I saw. And if you ever need like a medium or something to come out to talk about something important that you find or something new, you're by all means welcome to reach out to me, and I can give you like a half an hour to an hour special, though. But to tell you the truth, as far as me contacting you or any of my other guests goes, ever since I started doing this show from day one, I've always felt an obligation to try to get different guests on every week before giving one specific guest double that I felt was the fairest, most impartial, and most informative way to do a show that seeks to expose the true and false nature of reality. So that probably does mean that I won't be asking you to come on my show again, but please understand that's only because I need to give thousands upon thousands of other fascinating individuals like you a chance to have some glory on my show. But I promise to make sure that this interview we did gets heard. I will upload it to YouTube, spread it far and wide on social mediums, and there's no doubt that a lot of the things you said in this interview will wake people up. Jennifer, good luck. Loved having you on.
Thanks. Send me the link by email, and I'll put it on my film website as well, which is TravisWaltonTheMovie.com.
And all that other website, On Wings Productions, you want to tell us about that before you go?
Yeah, actually, people can find On Wings if they find TravisWaltonTheMovie.com, and that's just as easy for them to find. If they live in the Philadelphia area and they want to come to a local educational program, they can go to MainlineMUFON.com.
All right. Maybe I'll stop by at one of those things sometime. And I'll
that
definitely
would be great.
Yeah, I'll see you soon. All right, Jennifer.
Thanks.
Take care and good luck.
Thanks so much.
You're very welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Folks, that's the end of this show, and next week on the show we will be having Linda Zimmerman, who did a presentation on the UFO TV YouTube channel recently. It was actually at a MUFON conference, coincidentally, back in the day, not that long ago, that she talked about things like some sort of Hudson UFO sighting. We'll talk about that and other things that Linda Zimmerman has to talk about. So Linda Zimmerman next week from 6 to 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on June 8th. That'll be next Wednesday. So this is Andrew Fisher signing off from Nature of Reality Radio. And namaste, everybody. Enjoy the rest of your trek throughout infinite consciousness.